Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. Thank you so much for being with me today. Today, my guest is Sara Carter, and if you're not familiar with Sara, Sara is a mixing and mastering engineer based out of the UK. She's also an online educator as well, who runs a great YouTube channel teaching music production as well. She's worked with a variety of artists from Crowded House, The Cure, Adele, The Black Keys, Corrine Bailey Rae, Katie Tunstall, a whole bunch of amazing people. And she just has an amazing amount of knowledge of what it's like to work in the radio industry and in the studio side of things, and especially working quick, because she did a lot of work on the BBC Live Lounge sessions. And if you've ever seen any of those, they are pretty impressive. And as you'll hear in this interview when she describes how these sessions work, it's a lot of fast work, and it requires a lot of attention to detail. And I think you're going to find that part of the conversation very fascinating. But yeah, we get into a lot of great conversation around her time working at the BBC, her time working on the Live Lounge, and working with live off the floor recordings, and some ways that you can prepare for those to get the best experience and to get the best quality sound. We also get into some deeper stuff, which I think is really important to talk about, regarding imposter syndrome, because I know a lot of people out there listening to this really have a hard time with imposter syndrome and feeling like your work doesn't compare to the quality of work of other people's, and how that affects you. And Sara shares her own experience with this and how she's learned to combat that and move forward and actually start to pick up momentum to be ignited by this again and feel really excited by it. So Sara shares some great tips in this episode. I know you're going to find this episode super, super helpful. So let's just jump right into the interview. Sara Carter, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking me to come on the podcast.
Of course, you're doing so much amazing stuff. So it's always great to have people on here that I really respect and that I know are absolutely crushing it. So thank you for being on. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
For people who might not know your background and how you got into music, how you got into mixing and all the stuff that you're doing right now, can you give us that background?
Yeah, I've been an audio engineer now since about 2003. Professionally, I would say. And I started out my career with the BBC in London, and I worked across all their main network radio channels. So we're talking about really well-known radio stations in the UK, like Radio 1, Radio 2, and 6 Music. And also, because the diverse range of the coverage of the BBC, I worked on everything from documentaries to radio dramas to recording and mixing music, which of course is the direction I really wanted to go in, and was very fortunate enough to be chosen by the BBC to do that. And I got to work from the Maida Vale studios, which was awesome, and worked with some really amazing people. And it's only been recently, I guess in the last 5 years, where I decided to take up mixing in a freelance capacity and really work with bands, unsigned bands all across the world, to help them get quality mixers that stand shoulder to shoulder with the bigger names on the playlists that they're competing on, like Spotify and Apple Music and all the others. So that's what I have been doing. And then in the very recent times, I've gone more into education in terms of helping people mix music at home on their own equipment to get pro results. So I've kind of shifted a bit from what originally started out as a hobby in the 90s to going pro, to then leaving audio for a spell. For a bit of a career break and a rest, to get back into it again in around about 2017, which was a bit of a shock because things were quite different in 2017. When I left the BBC in 2009, the technology had moved on somewhat, so I had a bit of catching up to do. But I'm there now and I love it, and that's the sort of thing I want to help other people get their head round as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I imagine that even just getting in with the BBC, that's got to be a pretty tough feat to accomplish. Like, I imagine there's a lot of competition to get into that kind of job, right?
Yeah. There were, from memory, somewhere between 600 and 700 applicants for the job. And I felt as though almost it was like my last chance to get into professional audio, because I was really looking to career change. Because at that time, I was about, I think I was about 32 or 33 years old. So I was not a spring chicken coming into the audio world, and there were lots of younger people coming out of university with degrees. So I had a lot of competition. And so when the BBC job popped up, after I'd had a few failures trying to get in at professional studios, I really felt as though it was my chance. So I went for it in a big way and learned how to smash an interview, really. And, it was... I spent about a week filling in like it was a full-time job for the week, was to fill in the application form. Because if you don't even get an interview, then that's the end of it, isn't it?
Of course.
So my goal was to just get an interview, and then I'd worry about the interview afterwards. So, out of 600 or 700 applicants, I got an interview, which turned out to be 3 interviews. And again, still highly attended by, lots of keen people. So I then had to kind of look how to smash an interview then.
For sure.
But I put all my effort into it, and I really wanted it. And they were taking on 6 studio managers, is the title that the BBC gave trainee sound engineers for the radio, for radio. So I got one of the 6 spots. I was the only girl, which I mean, that's not as unusual as it sounds these days, because when I joined the BBC, I was astounded by the amount of women engineers that were there working. It was probably, I don't know, 75-25% split. There was loads more women there than I expected.
That's great.
And they were so good, brilliant engineers. So that was quite comforting, actually, going in to find that. So they were all quite surprised that I was the only female on the intake that time round. So I had 5 other guys to kind of to deal with through the training, which is fine because I my first job was in the motor trade, so that's with nothing but fellas, and then I get into audio, and it's much the same. So it was completely fine.
Yeah, but it sounds like at the end of the day, like you seem to really grasp the concept of making a strong first impression, and making it your goal to go in, do the absolute best that you can, show what you're confident with, show what you're capable of, and that itself that's the best thing you could do, right? Like that's as far as like getting a job, or whether it's like attracting people to work with you, or just like any sort of situation, it's like wherever you can provide value to people and make it known that you have that, or at least that you have that drive to push yourself to learn it if you don't know it. That goes a long way as far as instilling confidence in other people, so that they choose to work with you. That's really important.
Yes, yeah.
And no matter what the competition is, like as long as you're continuing to put forth that energy, you're gonna get good response from it.
Yeah. I mean, I put in a lot of effort in. As I said, there were a couple of technical interviews as well, where we were given various errors or faults on audio recordings that we had to identify, and then there was a mock radio studio working with a reel-to-reel tape machine. Well, 3 of them actually in a line, and working to a script and moving between the tape machines at the right times. So, I mean, that I couldn't prepare for. I never used a reel-to-reel tape recorder in my life, But the certainly because of the hobby, being a hobby for so long, and because I'd read, it felt like every book on the topic, Sound on Sound magazine, then, I mean, whether I needed to go to college or not, I don't know, but I felt, for me, to honestly present myself as a professional audio engineer, I needed to know the foundational topics. And so for me, in order that I actually did the work, I felt as though I needed to attend a class. I needed to go to, a specialist college. And I found that SAE is just renowned for their audio engineering courses. They had a studio in London, and I signed up, paid my money, eye-wateringly, and went all in on the course. It was a part-time course over 18 months. I went every Saturday, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed learning everything about sound and electronics. I won't pretend to understand all of it, but what it did do was just give me a deeper understanding of the equipment, to know why it worked a certain way or how to get the best out of it. And I think that's really important. And I think a lot of people starting out are missing that step. It's so easy now to consume content on, probably YouTube, and then various forums on the internet and memberships and what have you. I think what can happen is that beginners can find themselves jumping into a topic in the middle of it and not realising it. And so what happens then is they don't grasp the concept, or they think they do, but then they don't get the results they're expecting. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I am very aware of and want to make sure that I get across in my tutorials and in my courses, so that people can get that grounding, and then they can make better decisions, more informed decisions about mixing.
Absolutely.
And then, mix faster if that's your goal, or not. If it's not, then, but at least you can be more confident in your work because you can stand by your decisions.
For sure. Well, it's kind of like what you and I were talking about before we started recording, that whole idea of, even as much as you and I both teach people how to improve their mixes, it's like, sometimes the recording part of it is the part that people are dropping the ball, and, you can only perfect things so much in a mix. And so you have to understand some of those earlier stages, and you have to realize that in order to kind of put this whole thing together, it takes all of the right ingredients along the way. And if you just focus on one thing, it's not gonna, it's like learning how to bake a cake, and all you want to do is like be the icing specialist or something like that. You can have a shitty cake and put the best icing on it. Doesn't matter. It's still going to be awful, right? So it's the same thing. And yeah, absolutely. Like, people definitely need to pay attention to those earlier stages and really feel, see it all the way through in order to actually get those results.
Yeah.
And I love your attitude about all that stuff, and just like how you pushed yourself to learn this stuff. So when you went to SAE, was that while you were at the BBC? Like, did you get the BBC job first and then jump into SAE, or was that kind of in preparation for the BBC thing?
No, that was in preparation. I didn't feel as though I could put myself up for any position in a studio without having some sort of qualification. I don't know whether that's... I don't know if it's the same nowadays, but... with my background, it's just kind of how I expected, what I felt was the right way to go about it, really, and to feel justified in myself, to put myself up for jobs and for positions in studios. And also, I mean, it just goes to prove to them that you are committed and you've got some skin in the game. You've put your money down. You've done the course. You've got the degree or the certification or diploma, whatever it is you've gone for. So you've proven that you can actually learn and do the work to a point where you've gained this certificate. So it was a no-brainer for me. I just had to do it. So it involved a move. At the time, I was living in the Midlands in England, which is in the middle of England, as the name suggests. So I had to move down south to London. And my partner and I moved down to Basingstoke, which is in Hampshire, which is about an hour or so away from London. So it's commutable. So that's kind of how it all happened, really. Things just fell into place. And it was made very easy for me to be able to do that move, to sell my house. I got on the course, passed the entry to get on the course, and it wasn't plain sailing, but it happened easier, I think, than I expected.
For sure. And it sounds like, I mean, again, you prepared yourself by doing the work, and you actually did the work, and that's the important part of it, is that, like, it sounds like you didn't just go to school. Like, you were working on it. You were like, you said, like, working on getting the application perfect and all that stuff. Like, there was clearly more of an effort than just like, I'm going to go to school, I'm entitled to this job, which I feel like a lot of people do have that thought. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you have to prove yourself. You have to put yourself out there and actually work for it. And clearly you absolutely did. I'm curious to know, when you got that job at the BBC, because I know a lot of radio, like, I've never worked in radio myself, but I do know that a lot of the equipment that is in that field is often very different than, like, in the studio world sometimes. Maybe because of what you were doing, you were actually working at a studio, might have had a little bit more. But did you find that you were, like, learning a lot of new tech while you were there?
Yes. I mean, certainly the broadcast side of things, getting, audio out into the world, into the airwaves, and all that entails was quite a learning curve. It's more than just getting signals into a desk. It's understanding how they get there in the first place as well, to make sure that they do. So there's lots of patch bays everywhere and plugging things in and out of other things. And but like anything else, you get to know the tools you work with. And so it becomes easier, and you learn it over time. But the BBC have a terrific training sort of course, I guess. It's quite long and in-depth. It was a residential course for about 6 weeks. And then you do that before you can even go anywhere near a radio studio. I think even when we first started our first day, it was going to be at least 2 weeks till we were able to even touch any piece of equipment. We were just there and just were put on a chair. So we were put on a chair on the back of the studio and just sat there and watched and listened, which was great, actually. That actually suited me.
It's kind of like almost getting an internship at a studio to some degree, where you're just watching and observing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so that was a great introduction to it for me. And then the great thing about it was that you got to see everything that you learned on the training. You could see it actually in action. Mm-hmm. So that was really great. So things started to click into place then.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was a fun time, interesting time, and a very scary time as well. I forever had the fear of dropping off air, dead air. Yeah. I had that fear of being in charge of a radio program and then it falling off air, and it was going to be down to me to get it back on air. That was my fear. Oh, thank goodness. It never, ever happened to me. Whenever it did happen, there were lots of questions asked. So I was thankful that it didn't curse me in any way.
Yeah, I'm sure it takes a lot of accumulation of effect or of problems for that to happen. It's not just one thing that takes it all down.
Yeah.
But it also goes to show your attention to detail as well, because I'm sure, you always have to be aware of all of the things that are going on,
Everything
all the surroundings.
that's going on.
And,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like, what the person before you did and how you
Yes.
'cause, I guess it's like that in a studio too, right? If you're ever sharing a space with someone, it's like they may mess around with all the settings on all the compressors and EQs and stuff. And you just have to learn to watch your tracks, pay attention to those details so you can pick up where you're supposed to be,
Yes, yeah. I mean, we always had to zero the desk before we left the studio, and I guess if you were mindful that you'd done any crazy settings on any outboard, you'd reset those just to be kind.
Yeah.
That was an aspect actually of the job I didn't particularly enjoy, and that was moving around different studios, even though they were all built to kind of mirror each other and be the same. In essence, they all had their own little quirks, particularly as certain studios were inhabited by DJs every day. And so there would be settings that would be specifically for them that you had to kind of work around sometimes. And I just found I much prefer learning a set of equipment that is mine essentially, that I've put together, that I've built, and I know where everything's been plugged. And I found that a bit uncomfortable at the BBC, having to move around different studios. It wasn't just the radio studios per se, or Maida Vale. They had lots of little kind of offices that were set up as studios as well. So, I mean, you can imagine the BBC broadcasting house. There were dozens, if not, I can't even imagine. There must have been so many different little satellite studios on various floors of broadcasting house. It was. I just found it all really uncomfortable. I like a creature of habit, I suppose. So I like to know what I'm dealing with. To feel properly comfortable.
Of course. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. I think there's something very comforting to just working in your own space where it's set up the way you want it to be. And, I feel that way, like, even when I work out of a different studio to, like, record things, I almost always say, like, okay, cool, well, we recorded everything here. I'm taking it back home. I feel so much more comfortable mixing at home, like, because I work there every day. Everything's set up the way I want, and I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, when you know your surroundings, you know what is going to allow you to work more efficiently and all that kind of stuff. Like, put yourself in that situation as much as possible to you get the best results, right? I mean, it's obviously totally a little different when you're working at a radio station. You have no choice but to do it. But clearly, like, as your career has progressed and to where you are now, you're definitely in a lot more of a comfortable situation now and working out of a consistent place.
Yes, I'm able to control my surroundings, really. So. Yeah, that's me in a happy place.
Yeah.
made myself sound really controlling, kind of.
No, I totally get it. It's not controlling at all. It's comfortable. You trust things a lot more when you work in the same environment all the time. Yeah. And it just makes your job a lot easier. It makes the end result a lot better too because of that.
Yeah, it kind of frees up a certain portion of your brain to be able to use it somewhere else, usually, hopefully, on more creative endeavours.
For sure.
Than trying to find bugs or problems.
Well, one question that I did want to ask you about the radio side of it, because I do find it very fascinating, is you'd kind of mentioned earlier the idea of, like, being aware of the signal and how it gets transmitted and all that kind of stuff. One thing that I've always heard about is that when it comes to radio stations is that they tend to compress their signal quite a bit for transmission. And I'm curious to know, like, are those compression settings something that is like a broadcast standard? Is that something that is kind of just based on station to station? They kind of dial in their own settings. Like, what if someone were thinking of trying to create radio ready mixes? Like, what are those things that they need to consider, knowing that the radio is going to adjust their signal after the fact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, each network had its own compression settings or limiter settings. It's a box of tricks called the Optimod that is across every network before it goes out to air. And basically it's there just to catch, just to stop breaking the transmitter equipment, basically. But each is set very differently. So Radio 1 is pop music, dance music, it's what all the kids are listening to. So the music tends to be really loud, really compressed. Radio 2 is more middle of the road, but still with pop tunes as well, but it's slightly less compressed. Radio 3 is classical music, so there's very little compression there. And then you've got Radio 4, which is a speech network. So again, a little bit there, but it's just there just to stop breaking the equipment further down the chain as far as the transmitters are concerned. But yeah, in terms of wanting to make a radio-ready mix, I don't think that's worth thinking about, because every mix that gets played out on the radio has been mastered. So I think if you take your mix, either learn about mastering yourself and master your own mixes, or you actually, use an external mastering engineer, which is a great decision to do, because it's not expensive to get a single mastered. Then you don't need to concern yourself with reverse engineering your sound to sound great on the radio, because most people are listening to, I don't know how many people are listening to radio these days anyway. Aren't people just, getting Spotify up on their phone and, listening to streaming services? The radio obviously still exists. And yes, we have that terminology, don't we? Radio ready mixers. Whatever that means, because I think that's just a mix. I think it's just an ordinary mix. Just mix it, to reasonable levels in terms of loudness. Send it to a mastering engineer, or do a little bit of research and master it yourself. Get it a little bit louder in that process. And you're good. Don't worry about, the radio stations are going to smash it anyway. If anything, I would say it's, probably less is better. Keep as much dynamic range as possible in your mix and in your master, because if you are intending for it to go out on the radio, that dynamic range is going to get squashed. And the more you squash the dynamic range, the more your record will sound small and narrow. So yeah, try and keep as much dynamic range as possible in your mix and in your master, and you should be good to go.
I agree with that whole answer there. I think, that idea of radio ready mixes, it is kind of a weird term to use to some degree, because I agree. It is more to do with just like creating a good mix.
It's like creating a professional sounding mix. I think that's what it means. I don't know quite where the terminology came from, but it's instantly understandable. You hear that term, and as a layperson, you would go, "Yeah, that's what I want. I want my mix to sound like it's come off the radio." Yeah.
I think it's just something to do with you want it to be able to compete with the quality of the music that's out there, and the quality that you hear on the radio is often considered the best quality. It's the cleanest. It's a well balanced thing. It's you're not hearing things that make you want to rip your ears off. It's not harsh or too muddy or that kind of thing. So it's interesting, because I do know people that have asked me about that, if it's going to be on the radio, well, what happens after the fact? Is there a way to prepare? But it's I think it's almost like thinking about it like when you're sending a mix to a mastering engineer to some degree too, where it's like the more dynamics you have in it, the better off a mastering engineer can be. And, you know, it's same with like even sending your music to Spotify or something like that. It's like, yeah, like they adjust your signal when it gets there. So if you have something that's more dynamic, it often works better with those algorithms that, you know, modify your sound. So being at least aware of that stuff is important, and you know, just trying to make the best sounding mix you can possibly make, something that sounds clear and balanced and exciting, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was in regards to the BBC Live Lounge sessions that you got to work on, because you did a lot of those as well. And a lot of those are done all off the floor, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it looks like it's a relatively small space from a lot of the videos that I've seen as well, right?
Yes. It's a different space now to what it was when I did it. It was at times an even smaller space. It was actually a corridor.
Oh, wow.
In the studios, Radio 1 was in a different studio to what it's in these days. So we would just take a trip up the road and walk into the studios, and the Live Lounge was literally a corridor between two studios.
It was literally the lounge.
Yeah, literally. And, you know, it was very much a setup with just a handful of basic outboard, really. A really well-known consumer mixing desk, something like the Ghost or something like that it was. Can you remember that?
Like a Soundcraft?
Yeah. It was that kind of level mixing desk. And the equipment changed over the years, because a lot of things happened whilst I was there with regard to the equipment and going digital wherever possible. So, the main Live Lounge was a corridor.
That's awesome.
And I remember there were so many bands, I can't possibly remember all of them, but it was really great. I don't know how they felt about it. You know, they were coming in to the one of the largest radio networks in the country, and there they were offloading equipment in this corridor. But you know, the producers would always communicate the reality of the Live Lounge and request acoustic equipment wherever possible. But yet bands, certain, you know, a number of bands would still turn up with their full tour rig, you know. So it did get really loud in there. Not so much for us. We were fine. We were in another room.
Yeah.
But it was a real kind of lash up. The only way I can describe it. It was an adventure every time we did one, really.
I bet. Yeah, it's funny because when you listen to those recordings, they're so well done. So I can understand why people might think that, like, you know, it is like this big pro space, because it always does turn out really, really well. But I guess if you also pay attention to what you hear on those videos, it tends to be very stripped back usually. So
yeah, and that's why. Yeah, and that's why. I mean, that was the earliest part of my career with the BBC. The Live Lounge was literally a corridor. And then they decided that, you know, we had a spare studio at Maida Vale. There were several studios at Maida Vale that were closed down because they just weren't cost effective to keep open and run. You know, the BBC is a public service network, so the money wasn't flowing in as if it were a commercial setup. So what they decided to do was to reintroduce one of the studios in Maida Vale as the new Live Lounge, which is where I did a lot of work. So it was a much better space, still a small studio by, you know, any stretch of the imagination, but it was acoustically treated. We'd got professional equipment there, and it was nicer for the artists as well. They'd got spaces that they could go to and relax in. So that was great. I mean, it was still a Soundcraft Ghost, you know, mixing desk with Droma compressors, and I think we had some of that, the purple-faced Yuri kind of copies. I can't remember. MC.
Oh, like the purple 1176s?
Yeah. And pretty run-of-the-mill effects, lexicon effects and things like that. Typical of what you'd see in a home studio, really. But that's what we were doing, live lounges with.
That's very cool. I imagine that because you were working in such small spaces, even when you moved to the bigger space, I'm sure it was still an issue. Like, I'm sure bleed was constantly something that you guys would battle with, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't remember it being a big problem, though. Because, you're usually still dealing with a drum kit of some sort, albeit it might be acoustic guitars and it might be, an electric piano of some description and a vocalist. But bleed in the sense of what, headphone bleed, or as in mic spill?
I would just think mic spill. If you have all these instruments in a small room, you're probably going to get a lot of spillover into the mics.
Yes. I get where you're coming from now. So, you just got to embrace that. You've got to use that. There was no way that we didn't make any attempt to. Obviously, you're aware of if you're really like over compressing something and that's bringing up the room in a big way, then you've got to be across that.
Yeah.
But no, we would just go with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys did anything to kind of...
No. And it was usually an SM58 for the vocalist, and you just place the people in the room so that, you can really utilise the polar pattern of the microphone to reject spill, much like a live session, a live stage performance.
For sure. And that's what I was curious about. Like, I know a lot of people that do really believe in the idea, because there's always those two schools of thought when it comes to recording, right? There's the people that want to record everything live off the floor, and then there's the people who track everything individually. And oftentimes space is one of the biggest factors in determining whether you're going to do one or the other. But there are a lot of people that really do believe that there's like the magic to recording live off the floor. And a lot of people, especially in the home studio market, are working in very small rooms. So, when it comes to preparing for dealing with bleed, that kind of thing, what are some of your tips there to help people control it a little bit more?
I guess it would be really, as I've just mentioned, taking advantage of getting to know your microphones and the polar patterns. Don't go using Omni and basically have everybody facing each other almost like in a circle. So you're all got eye contact with each other, and therefore then all the microphones are all going to be, the spill should be to the back of the microphone. And then I would suggest close miking, as close as you can get away with. Using dynamic vocal mic as well. That really helps in that situation. Condenser mic is going to be so much more. There's so much more sensitivity, and they pick up so much more background noise. So a dynamic mic in any of those situations would work really well. Like SM57s on the guitar cabs, on the drum, on the snares.
You often see a lot of SM7Bs for vocal mics. That kind
of thing. Yeah. That kind of thing. Just think about the tools and pick the best tools for the job. Yep. But there's no reason why, you can't get a good result with a little bit of consideration and just, do a little bit of research and try things out, see what works. Of course, you've got the baffles, the gobos. If you can make some of those, they're quite easy to make if you're handy like that. So you can move those around to kind of partition off the drums, use blankets over the drums, over the kick drum. And you can get, like I said, the gobos, the half-sized ones that just come up to sort of your waist height. They're great for just putting around a guitar cab. Mm-hmm.
Those are great tips, for sure.
Yeah, that should all work.
Those are great tips. I like that. And I think, it is often a matter of just, it's those little details like positioning that go a long, long way. And, you know, how you said, like, have everyone in a circle, have, you know, be using the back of the mics and consider the rejection that you get out of those things. Because so many people are just so focused on, like, where do I put the mic on the instrument? And, like, they're thinking just, like, from what's in front of the capsule and not what's behind. And there's a lot of power to understanding what goes on behind the microphone as well. And how that makes a big impact. Yeah, that's awesome. Another thing I was curious to know about when it came to those Live Lounge recordings was that it seemed like the mixing side of things is very, very fast, and that you pretty much only get one shot to do it, and it's live, right? Like, were you guys editing anything after the fact, or was it legitimately live?
No, it's live. I mean, some were pre-recorded, but just a small percentage, really, just because of the artist's commitments. You know, they might be wanting to promote their latest release, but you know, our calendars didn't line up, so they would come in and we would just do a pre-record for those days. But there was no editing, still no editing done. It was just recorded live. That's it. And so, it's certainly developed my workflow, having to work to a time constraint and you know, having to make decisions on the fly and go with them, which is something I'm trying to get across to people. Now, you see, people have got the luxury of time, usually, and that's where you can end up going down all sorts of rabbit holes. And, you know, your recording session can take a lot longer than you thought. You know, then you want everything to be perfect. Doesn't sound quite right, so we'll go, we'll record it again next weekend, you know, and it's just never ending. And I think there's a lot to be said for just making a decision and sticking with it, because you might surprise yourself what you can actually achieve with what you think might not, with something that might not sound that great initially. You might surprise yourself. Sure, if you know, have a play around with it after the fact. And if you're really not happy with it and you're not liking the sound of it and you think you can improve it, then go ahead. Mm-hmm. But in terms of your question and asking about the Live Lounge and those recordings, that's just how they were. We had a little bit of rehearsal time. Yeah,
I was curious about that.
I mean, I think it was about 11 o'clock in the morning would be when the Live Lounges would be broadcast. So we might have load-in time of about 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe. Plus, don't forget as well, the artists aren't used to working at that time in the morning, so they need a little bit of kind of coaxing, and
they need to wake up and sober up.
They need to wake up, drink lots of water, and get the voice going. So, you know, they need it to get the vocal cords active, and we needed it just to get some settings dialed in on the desk. But once we went live, and then that was it.
So would you guys typically kind of do a couple quick run-throughs just to kind of create like a bit of a rough mix before you actually went to air?
Yes. That's exactly what we did. We just, you know, it would be more than a couple of quick run-throughs, you know. It was 2 songs they'd do, you see. So one would be one of their own songs, and then there would be a cover. They'd choose a cover to do in their own particular style, which was always great, particularly if they did come in with acoustic instruments and they'd done their own interpretation. They were always fun. So the songs would get a good airing. They would certainly get run through several times. And then, you know, we wanted to make sure the artists were happy with the headphones. That was really important. And we obviously, as I say, wanted to get just a rough mix set up on the desk, a starting point. You know, we know where they want to go. You know, we've listened to the song, but then we'd just get ready for the top of the song so that we're ready, and then you just mix it live.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine that is pretty nerve-wracking, but at the same time, very satisfying when you pull it off, right?
Yeah. I remember when I did Corrine Bailey Rae, in the live lounge, we used to rely, particularly for vocalists, we would rely a lot on compression and a good amount of compression. So when she said, I don't like compression, please don't use any compression on my voice, I was like, oh, no, really? You are joking.
Yeah.
No, I don't like to hear the compression, because it affected her. She's reacting to what she's hearing in the headphones. She's reacting to her performance. And if you're using a compressor and squashing the dynamics out of it, she's only going to then wants to sing louder to get the dynamics, and it's not happening. And she had been around long enough at that point to know that she didn't like a lot of compression, and enough to say to sound engineers at various radio stations, I'm sure, to make sure that they knew that this wasn't going to be. So, I mean, I don't think I did anything. I didn't do any trick or anything. I just didn't use a lot of compression on her, and what I had to do was ride it on the fader on the desk. But because we'd had all those run-throughs, I was prepared to a point. I knew where she was going to be going for it.
Yeah.
And of course, once they're live on air, they always give it more than they did in rehearsal.
Of course.
So, you kind of factor that in as well.
Just pull everything down like 6 dB or so on the board.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. And I think that's, for someone like her to be aware of how important that is to her headphone mix, I think is very impressive. And it brings up a really good question, like something that I'm very curious to know about. Like, when it comes to creating great headphone mixes, what, in your experience, does that entail? Because I'm sure, different instruments, I always find like drummers love to have crap ton of click track or whatever, it's like blasting their ears off. But like, it seems like different instruments require different mixes generally. So what advice would you have for that?
I would say that wherever possible, if you can facilitate the musicians so that they've got their own headphone mix, rather than having to share it with another. If you've not got much in the way of equipment, you might be tempted to bus or sum two musicians together. Like, if you've got, a couple of similar sounding instruments, you may be tempted to do that. But I would say, if at all possible, try to get each musician their own headphone mix. Even a mono, just a mono one is fine, except for the drummer. Because everybody, that's what we used to do at Maida Vale. The drum headphone mix was always on the stereo bus, and everybody else was on a mono bus. And that's all that they ever needed. We had headphone boxes where I tell a lie. We used to pan the feeds, the auxiliaries. We used to pan them at the desk to be able to send different things to different channels as well. So, but yeah, I would just say, obviously, just have some basic effects on hand as well. Just a reverb. Reverb always makes things sound better. So just a little bit of reverb on for the vocalist, obviously, and then a little, if the guitarist wants it. I think it just comes down to communication. It's just talking with the musicians and asking what they want to hear, and what they're hearing. Do they like it? Is it working for them? And from my experience, that they seem to be really happy with the basic of setups. So they just want to hear themselves. So I think it's just communication and giving them what they want, if it's at all possible.
For sure. Yeah, it's almost like if you can at least provide just like a kind of a standard mix for everyone to go off of, and then like boost their own instrument, that kind of thing. Yeah, usually that's usually all they need, because they need to be able to they're not going to be trying to, they shouldn't be trying to hear their own instrument in the mix, like, struggling to figure that out. It should be something that's obvious and it feels natural, and when they play a chord, they know that that's their chord and not someone else.
Yes.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's really important. I do think headphone mixes is a really under-discussed topic, that when it comes to being in the studio and getting great performances, like headphone mixes are very important for that. Because as you said, with like the Corrine Bailey Rae thing, it's like, if you get that, if you had compressed her mix, she would have had a harder time singing and nailing the performance,
and it wouldn't have sounded as good. And at the end of the day, you're trying to capture a performance, and for the artist, you want them to be happy and you want them to give their best performance. And so as an engineer, it's your job to facilitate that, because we just want to hear great music, and to be, can you imagine, being an engineer at a particular point in history and you were the engineer on that session kind of thing. And it was all because you'd been really mindful of making sure the artist was happy and hearing what they needed to hear to produce that performance.
Of course.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, of course. Have you found that your experience in doing these live mixes has made you a faster engineer in the studio? Or do you prefer to take your time when you have that luxury?
I do like to take my time, but I do like to make decisions quickly, because I think that's where you're at your most creative. I think if you let those moments just disappear by overanalyzing them, or second guessing them, I think that's a mistake, because that's your instinct. As a listener, you've been listening to music since, probably the day you were born. So you are an expert listener at music. You know what a normal mix sounds like, what a radio-ready mix sounds like. You know it. So use that inbuilt instinct that you've got for what sounds right in terms of tone and level. And then also grab those opportunities where you get an idea pop into your head as well at that point. That's your instinct talking to you as well. And whether you can act on it there and then, that's great. But if you can't and you want to come back to it, then just have a notepad, either digital or, a little notepad on your desk. Just jot the idea down. And then I just think it's so important to capture those moments, because that's creativity. That's it working in you. So it's really important to capture that. So mixing quickly is very different from making decisions quickly. I think, when you're used to making decisions and you can stand by your decisions and your reasoning for them, then the mix will automatically happen quicker anyway. But to give you some context, I also like to take breaks, and I like to leave things overnight and come back to them in the morning to get true perspective back again. Because it's a very fleeting thing. When you've been listening to the same song over and over and over, or the same snare drum over and over and over while you've been trying to EQ it and get some ringing out of it, or to get some tone out of it that you don't like, you just lose perspective. So it's really important to take breaks and to keep moving through a mix, move on to the next thing. Don't get bogged down in a problem for too long. I would go so far as to say, time yourself. Have a kitchen timer on your desk or something with 5 minutes or 3 minutes or something, and just tap it and go, right, for the next 3 minutes, I'm going to work on this snare EQ. And then when it goes off, right, back out solo, get on with the drum mix. Because what happens is, as the mix develops and more elements come in and you EQ those elements, that original problem might not be a problem anymore in the final mix. So don't get bogged down and just keep moving and just make decisions faster.
I love that.
That's my...
I love that. I think it's really important to place those restrictions on yourself. Like, I like that idea of just give yourself 5 minutes to work on the snare drum, that kind of thing. Because it's almost like when you force yourself to work faster, it is more of that that internal guide that you had mentioned earlier. You know, it's like your gut is telling you this is what music sounds like. I know it, so I'm going to just get it as close as I can to that immediately. And
Yes.
it's always like after the fact that you're just like, oh, well, maybe I need to like get surgical with this and that, and it's like then you've kind of lost the big picture of it, you know. I remember even like when I was first learning this stuff, one of my mentors basically was like, okay, cool, like you've got a big mix to do here, and here is like 2 hours. That's all you've got. Just get it done, right? And I remember just being like, how do I do this in 2 hours? But when you force yourself to do it, it's amazing what you can do. You know, I've told people, I've coached students and told them like, do a mix in half hour, and it's like, how?
Yeah.
You know, but it's amazing the results that people get because they think quicker and they think big picture, and it, you know, it may not be a perfect mix, but it's often better than, you know, had they spent a lot of time over analyzing and undoing a lot of their hard work that they did in the earlier stages and all that kind of stuff, right?
Just as long as you hear the vocals, the kick and the snare, I think that's probably...
Yeah, but I mean, but that's a perfect example of like having that internal reference of what a good mix sounds like. You know, like the fact that you can easily identify these are the most important things. It's like if you know that stuff, you can make that happen right away. Whether it's with, you know, just go to volume first, you know, and just like if you can make that balance, and all of a sudden you're way closer than, you know, had you spent so much time EQing and compressing and multiband, but this and that, you know, it's like there's a lot of the times just the big picture things that are a lot easier to just dial in really quick.
Yes, yeah. It's that Pareto's principle, isn't it? The 80-20 rule.
Yes.
Where is it? 20% of your actions equals 80% of the results or something.
Yes.
So just, I can never say that the right way around, so I may have got that completely wrong.
No, I always get confused too, but no, you did it. You got it. You got it right.
You know, you can tackle the main elements of your mix is just by a few small moves, really. Levels, EQ, dynamic control, that's, you know, a bit of effects. That's it, really. Once you can kind of get those dialed in a big picture fashion, then you can go in and start to go finer if you really want to go into some finer detail.
For sure.
Which you will need to, particularly with EQ, to get if you want a clean sounding mix, then you know you need to learn how to use EQ. But yeah, you know, I think it's weird, isn't it? When you start to mix, you think, wow, this is coming together really quickly. I'm really happy with this. And then you start to take a few more listens. And then for me, I start to listen to then reference tracks and to compare it to other commercial mixers, particularly the ones that the clients have suggested that they'd like me to head in the direction of. And then you can kind of start to move it, manipulate it a bit. I do like to listen to the reference track fairly early on, just so that I'm not going down the completely
wrong direction.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I don't want to go down completely the wrong direction. I have to unpick everything and start again. But, yeah, in terms of time for mixing, I guess when I'm booking it in a calendar to mix a single, I usually give myself 2 days. And then maybe the third day morning to have a last listen and before I send it to the client. But those 2 days include, you know, quite a few breaks. They include probably finishing, I think I like to do it in like 4-hour chunks. Or, you know, I'll have a few breaks in that 4-hour chunk, but I do like to take a big break after 4 hours. So that sits nicely at lunchtime and then at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. And I just like to stop then because I know my ears are tired. I know I've lost perspective. And so I'm just going to go to bed and sleep on it, and I'll come back to it in the morning and have another listen and go from there. And day one is usually just prepping the mix anyway. Mm-hmm. It's just importing the tracks, importing my template, making sure the tracks all look right, sound right, they're named right, They fit my template. They're all coloured correctly. They're all going through the right group buses. So everything's routed how I like it to be routed. And then I'll fix things on that day one as well. So the phase on the drums, the phase on, if I've got more than one bass track, the phase on the bass. And any multi-mic'd instrument, any stereo instruments that have been using 2 microphones, or then I like to make sure they're in phase. Any edits, although there's usually, really, when I'm talking edits, really I'm talking about vocal edits, so breaths and lip smacks, just to make sure that they're not too loud. Tom, the in between, cut out the tom hits. Sometimes I do. I would say more. I usually do that, but I will have a listen first because it depends. If you've been given room mics or not. It depends what the overheads sound like. So if I feel as though I want more ambience around the drums, then I'll keep the in between tom hits, that spill. I'll keep that. I might manipulate it and make it a bit quieter, but I won't lose it completely. And so that is all kind of like day one. So it's all
really just a preparation day.
Yeah, and I just take my time with it, and then day 2 is the mix. I'll sit down in the morning, and that's doing is just separating your brain, your mindset, or the 2 halves of your brain, left brain, right brain. I'm using again, I can never remember which side of the brain does what, but I'm keeping all those kind of analytical, mathematical decisions to one day. And then I'm using the second day for all the creativity and the big picture thinking, the emotional thinking, the mood, I think your brain operates more efficiently like that.
100%. I agree with that.
So that's day 2. And then that's why then I don't like to send a mix at the end of the day. No, I have done it, but no matter how, really, you really should wait till the following morning. I've sat here on the evening and thought, oh, that sounds great. I'm really excited about it. I want to send it off now. And then I've come back to it in the morning and thought, oh my God, that snare is so loud. I'm so glad I didn't send that last night. So the third day, the morning of the third day, that's when I do all the very final polishing and send.
I love that you compartmentalize things like that. And that's exactly how I feel I work myself. Because, it's like when you're actually in the mixing stage, you don't want to have to be making decisions. You like a ton of decisions. You don't want to have to stop what you're doing and lose that momentum or any of that kind of stuff. It's like you want to just have clear vision of what that end result's supposed to sound like, and you just make it happen, or you can just be in your creative mindset and just get it done. But if you have to deal with all those edits or de-essing things or all that kind of stuff, like you mentioned that you do in your prep stage, it's like those things will always take you out of that zone, and it's going to slow you down. It's going to make you lose your perspective a lot easier. So it's great to really compartmentalize those different stages so that you have that clarity, you have that vision, you can just tackle it and get it done a lot quicker.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. At the beginning, you had mentioned when you were telling us your story of how you got to where you are, you did mention that you had at one point taken a break in your career and that you were feeling a little bit burnt out at that point. So what's some advice that you would give to people who are listening to this who might be feeling similar stress or feelings about that, maybe that are, debating whether they should get out or that kind of thing? What advice would you give to people in that sort of situation?
I think it's to take some time to really think about how you're feeling about the whole thing. What it is that's causing the burnout. Is it the sheer number of hours you're working? Is it the time of day that you're working? Is it you're not getting enough sleep? And then I suppose a big question is, do you really want to do this anymore?
That's a tough question for people to ask themselves, but it's so necessary. And it really can light a fire under you when you have to answer that question.
Yeah, because you go into it, these things, and you're so excited, thrilled, you've got your dream job, and then it doesn't quite work out how you'd expected, or certain things start to become an issue. And so, yeah, for me, for example, with the BBC, I had a long commute to get there and back from Basingstoke to London on the busiest motorways in the country. And I was working all different hours, different shifts. BBC were great about that, though. You would always be, you'd never be put on weird back-to-back shifts or anything. And you'd get days off, plenty of days off in between, anything like that. But nevertheless, having to commute to London on a motorbike, which is what I did, because it was the cheapest way for me to get into London and back every day, on these two busy motorways, and then London, central London itself, in all weathers. And you know, I don't know if you've been to the UK, but it rains here. So, that takes its toll.
Of course.
That then coupled with, moving studios, which is a bit uncomfortable for me anyway, the fear of falling off air, and then the feeling that I just perhaps wasn't cut out for it. I wasn't good enough. When I looked at all my peers, and I thought they were all amazing engineers, and I just thought, how does he know that? And how do they know how to do that? And I just thought, am I cut out for it? And I didn't know it then, and it was only later that I knew that was imposter syndrome. But back in 2008, 2009, I don't even know if people were talking about imposter syndrome then. But I just took it to be, I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I was frightened of being found out as being a fake, that I didn't know what I was doing, getting caught. What would people think of me? That I wasn't a particular, what's happened to her? She's gone right downhill. She used to be really good, and then she's lost her, and all this catastrophized going on in my brain.
You always make it so much worse than it actually is, right?
Goodness. So my reaction to that, I stuck it for probably another 12 months, but in the end, the way I deal with trauma or stress is to take myself out of the situation, take it away. That's the only way I know how to handle it. So I left, much to the surprise of everybody, and went into brewing, which was my hobby. That was my hobby that I used to help me get over my, that was how I got out of my head as a sound engineer, to brew beer. And then, if you may or may not have heard my story before, and then I went and did that for 6-7 years, something like that. Did all the technical exams. I became a head brewer. This is all craft ale that we're talking about, and I realised that I wasn't getting my... it just wasn't answering the questions. It just wasn't helping me in any way. It was that first initial, oh, this is great fun. Oh, it's so relaxing. All those worries I had in the BBC have gone. This is going to be great. But in the end, it was audio, it's music I wanted to work with. I always have had since I was a young child. So I had to go back to it. But I had to get over some issues that I picked up at the BBC, or because of leaving the BBC, the regret, the whole imposter syndrome thing. So I had to go and get some some therapy, some hypnotherapy, which, to my surprise, actually worked. 4 months later, I was suddenly thinking, listening to music and thinking, that kick drum, that's sounding... I'd mix that in a completely different way. And that just hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was amazing. Because up until that point, from leaving the BBC in 2009 to wanting to get back into music after doing some hypnotherapy in 2013, 2014, I'd not listened to music. I completely just couldn't listen to music. It was just instant regret, sadness. Any music I couldn't listen to any of my favourite albums anymore. I didn't enjoy them. And then, it's a sign, isn't it? It's just, what you're supposed to be doing in life. And I took that as a sign, got some help. And then, 2014, got back into mixing, which was completely different to how I'd left it in 2008, 2009. Because everybody was doing it at home in the computer. And at the BBC, we didn't really mix on computers. Computers were there. We had DAWs. We used SAE, which is more of a mastering DAW, but that's what was installed all over the BBC when I was there. And it was just really a glorified DAT machine. And we would just mix down onto a stereo track, do any edits that needed to be done, do a fade in, fade out, make a CD to send to the producer of the radio show, and then to give to the band to take home. So that was my extent of working on a digital audio workstation at that point, other than for editing speech, which I used to do a lot of for the radio networks, Radio 2, any speech on the radio, pre-recorded, needs editing. I used to do a lot on Radio 4, which is all speech. So I was great at editing speech and interviews, but music, I'd done very little of it. Because I didn't do it at home. Some guys did. They were producers as well. They did their own music, but I didn't. I always enjoyed more the engineering side of it than being a musician, because I wasn't much good. So that's when I used to brew beer instead.
So now that you're back into this, what are some of the ways that you manage your time better now so that you don't feel that burnout as much?
Now I very blessed, I guess, to say that I don't take on clients that I don't want to work with, and that sounds a bit harsh, but what I mean by that is I can pick and choose the artists I work with, and I really want to work with artists that I find exciting and interesting, and are doing something different, or have got a really good work ethic, and have put a lot of time and effort into the recording of their tracks. Then I'll consider that. But I haven't been taking on new clients for some time now, because I've got more into the educational content and creating courses for people so that they can mix it for themselves and get pro results at home. So that has been my main focus, really, certainly for the last 12 months. I tried to do it like 2 years ago. I tried to do both YouTube and
it's hard to do
clients, and I YouTube was just constantly having to take a back seat, because you mix a single, as we just discussed, it's 2.5, 3 days, and you wait for the client to come back. Could be the next day, could be in a week's time. My schedule was all over the place, so I couldn't plan anything. And then an album, that was a month of my time gone, with factoring in revisions and mastering as well. And so I made the decision a year ago to really focus on the YouTube content. The intention being to do a video a week, but even that is hard. So I'm doing one about once a fortnight now, because I want the videos to be quality. I don't want them to be just something that everybody knows or is of no value. I want them to actually teach people something and be able to communicate and connect with people in that way. So I do try and put a little bit more effort in, and so that does result in a video a fortnight. And I've been blown away by the positive comments I've been getting, the support. So that just keeps me going. I really enjoy doing it. And I'm having to learn, a whole new side of, video editing. Really is the new thing that I'm learning, and how to create better looking videos.
It keeps it fun. It keeps it fun and interesting. And I'm sure that you're finding as you're teaching this stuff, at least I found this with my own experience. I found that it forced me to become a better engineer because I was really breaking down my own processes.
Yes.
And when you start to actually think about like, oh, is this the best way to do this? Or is there a faster way, a better way? You're like, oh, you start to become faster and more confident in yourself because you've now actually given it the thought that maybe you hadn't before, right? A lot of those second nature tasks become things that you have to actually break down into and actually identify, like, what are those steps,
Yes, that's it. It's true what they say, that teaching is the best way to learn. So, and oftentimes I've chosen subjects myself that I've thought, I could do with a bit of a brush up on this myself, I'll do a video on that this week. So, it's great because I love to learn. And I love finding out how other people learn so that I can teach better.
Of course.
Because, I've never taught before doing the YouTube channel. So I wanted to be good at that and do the best I could do at that. So that's why, the YouTube channel is a bit of work in progress, in that I'm just learning what is resonating with people, what they like, what they don't like. I'm running with it, really.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you've been working on amazing stuff. I've seen your videos, and they're definitely, I could tell you put a lot of effort into them to make sure that they are done right. And I think there's a lot for people to take out of it, I think both you and I, we both share this mutual goal of just like helping people and seeing results and actually getting their music out there, feeling happy about it, proud of it. And, you're definitely doing a great job with all that stuff. So,
thank you.
Keep up the great work. It's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
If people want to follow you online and learn more about you and maybe even work with you, if they do have something that's interesting and fun that you might want to work on, what are the best places for them to go to learn more?
If you want to learn from me, then the best place would be to go to YouTube and look for Simply Mixing. That's my channel. I've got about 30 videos on there, I think, at the moment, that are probably aimed more at the beginner, but there's definitely more intermediate topics on there as well. And then if you want to work with me professionally as a mix engineer, then you can find my website, which is musicmixpro.co.uk. But as we said earlier in the interview, I'm not really taking on new clients at the moment because I've got so much stacked up to do this year. But if you think you've got something that I might be interested in, please get in touch. We can have a chat. And then I've got simplymixing.com, which is the website for the Simply Mixing channel. Also, if you're interested in learning more from me, then I've just released some courses on the Pro Mix Academy website. And there are 3 courses, and they're all aimed at beginners, and they are for EQ, compression, and effects. And it's really going back to the fundamentals, the basics, start from the ground up, so that you can, use these tools to the best of your ability. Understand why things are happening rather than just looking for how to do something. If you can understand why and how things work in the background, then you can make your own informed decisions rather than following someone's how-to video on YouTube, which probably won't work for your mix and your tracks, because that'd be amazing if it did. But
of course, those foundations or the fundamentals are definitely the important thing you have to grasp. There's no secret trick to mixing, and it's like, chances are you probably already know the tools that you need to use, and you've probably learned them at some point, but it's like going deeper on those basic tools is often the thing you need to master. And with that, you will get those radio ready mixes. But
yes.
Yeah. Awesome, Sarah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here today. And I think that you just shared so much great information. It was awesome to hear about the radio side of things and where you've shifted your business to now, and just a lot of your philosophies and processes. And I think it's going to be super helpful for people.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's been great to chat with you today. I say we were talking before we pressed record, weren't we? That we were aware. I was certainly aware of you and the work you were doing, but we hadn't actually connected, even though we'd kind of skimmed close in a couple of areas.
Yeah.
But no, it's great to meet you and to chat with you like we have done today. It's been good fun.
Awesome. We'll have to have you back. So that was my interview with Sara Carter, and I thought she gave us a lot of great insight into what it was like to work in the BBC and to be doing all of those live lounge recordings. And I love all of the little topics that we got into regarding things like how to work comfortably and why that's so important, or why creating headphone mixes can make a really big difference in terms of the performances that you capture. And I love the story that she shared about Corrine Bailey Rae and how she knew that compression would mess up her headphones and result in a poor performance. I just thought that was really fascinating, and I think it's a really important thing to understand because headphone mixes can go a really long way as far as getting the best performance. And if you're not considering how comfortable your musicians are, it can drastically affect the performances that you capture. So I thought that was really interesting. I love the topic about imposter syndrome and how she approached that, because I think that that's something that's very real. A lot of people struggle with that, myself included. We all go through it at some point. So it's really important for those stories to be shared so that people can resonate with other people and connect and learn various ways to cope with it and move beyond it. So just super grateful that Sarah shared that as well. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that interview. And I hope that you did too. And if you did, definitely make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live every Wednesday morning. And also make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com. That is where I help out musicians with creating pro sounding recordings and mixes from their home studios. And on that website, there's so many great resources designed to help make that process easy for you. One of which you're going to want to check out is called The Mixing Mindset. And that is a book that I put out a few years ago that really breaks down the process of mixing and breaks it down into a very step-by-step format for you so that you know exactly what steps to take, what order to work in, what to be listening for, what to be dialing in with your settings. That way, the process becomes very easy and straightforward for you, and you're not feeling scatterbrained throughout that whole process. So definitely check that out. It's called The Mixing Mindset, and it's available at MasterYourMix.com. So that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.